for a brief introduction with the work that the IIES does, for those of you who may not be familiar or who may not be members, we are the Boston and Rhode Island section of the Illuminating Engineering Society, which is a not-for-profit which focuses on the arts and science of illumination. So the IIS is a technical authority on lighting and has been active over the last century on all aspects of good lighting practice and disseminating this information to their members. As part of our Boston and Rhode Island section, we host monthly events focused on different topics related to lighting. Since we know that this crowd tonight has an interest in sustainability, I wanted to share one upcoming event with you. On February 25th from 4 to 5:30, we'll be hosting an event on quantifying daylighting and its use in lighting design. The session will focus on how to best illustrate to clients successful daylighting and how do you convey maximum occupant benefit. Quantification of daylighting has been done for a number of years, but there are still questions around this quantification and the methodology. So this session will cover those topics. So if you're interested in daylighting, we'd encourage you to register for that event. We're very lucky to have had some cross promotion for this event. I'm delighted that we have so many people here to talk about this, this cross promotion. Built Environment Plus generously shared this event with their members, and I'm so glad we have so many here people to talk about this important and emerging topic. I'd like to pass it over to Meredith Elblom briefly, who's their executive director, to talk a little bit about their work that they do and its relationship to sustainability.
Hi, Alexandra and everyone. Thanks for having me. It's so wonderful to see so many familiar faces, some that I haven't seen in a long time. So Built Environment Plus, some of you might know us more as the U.S. Green Building Council of Massachusetts. Can you guys still hear me, Alexandra?
Yes, I can hear you.
I'm back. You can hear me now? Sorry.
Yes.
I don't know if you said,
we lost you there.
Yeah, my internet, my husband works in internet and my internet isn't working right now. Anyways, so Built Environment Plus, you might know us better as the U.S. Green Building Council of Massachusetts. The plus is that we are also the local affiliate for the New England Collaborative of the International Living Futures Collaborative. This is what we do, driving sustainable and regenerative design, construction, and operations of the built environment. And then one thing I just wanted to tell you guys about that's exciting is we have money if you guys want to follow up with this about some education on healthy materials. And we have funding for both large companies and companies with under 100 employees. So come and find me after to learn more about that. We're also having, our collaborative is having an event on the 11th coming up next week on healthy materials. So come to our website, builtenvironmentplus.org, to learn more about that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Meredith. Before I turn it over to Melissa, I'd just like to say briefly, we do have AIA credits and we will be sharing a link in the chat at the end of the presentation. AIA credits will be automatically submitted. If you need to submit credits for any other type of certification, please request a certificate for self-reporting. So I'd like to thank Melissa Matz, Josh Feinstein, and Reiko Kagawa for all their work putting together this event. And I look forward to hearing about the research they're going to present to us tonight. So I'd like to turn it over to Melissa now.
Great, thank you. Cofield, I'll need to be able to share my screen.
There you go.
Thanks. You good?
Yes.
Okay. Good afternoon and good evening, everyone, depending on where you're logging in from. On behalf of the Boston IES and Rhode Island chapter and my colleagues at Slate and Feinstein, thank you for showing up to participate in this community gathering today. There's been a lot of momentum building towards this conversation since April of last year, so it's really exciting to see it result in this well-attended turnout as we begin to better self-organize in the lighting community around conversations of sustainability and material transparency. So thank you for being here. As a reminder, today's session is approved for 1.5 general LFA CE credits and 1.5 AIA LU HSW credits. You'll be prompted at the end, as Alexandra mentioned, to fill out your credit for credit, fill out the form for credit. However, since this is an accredited ILFI event, we have to collect a sign-in sheet for all participants. So please take a moment now to digitally sign in through the link that was just dropped in the chat box. And please be sure to sign in even if you do not require AIA or LFA continuing education credits. This is a separate sign-in. After you've signed in, we'd also like to see who is in the audience here today. So there's a second link being dropped in the chat now for a 1-question poll. So click on that one next. I'll briefly review the schedule and learning objectives with you while we sign in and complete the poll question. We'll kick off the conversation today with a summary of the research initiatives we've completed at Slade and Feinstein over the fall. And from there, we'll jump on to a roundtable discussion with our panelists today. What we can do to relate with this information moving forward. As questions arrive, you can drop them in the chat box at the end of our conversation. Our moderator, Josh Feinstein, will funnel the questions to the panel. Our aim today is firstly to review what we might gain, how we might gain more ground in the use and specification of responsibly sourced and manufactured materials that make up our luminaires on the market. Secondly, we aim to become aware of the opportunity before us right now to be market leaders in this new wave of sustainable manufacturing and the potential risk of not jumping on the bandwagon. Thirdly, we want to acknowledge the opportunity to build trust through material transparency and understand how occupants, and to understand how these labels can address material disclosure, climate impact, social equity, and the health and well-being of occupants. And lastly, we'll talk about ways we can celebrate our progress over perfection. So even through the messy process of working towards higher goals, finding ways to share these values and our progress with clients and our end users. And this is really a key factor because there can be tremendous forward movement in giving power to the consumer to make informed choices about what products are filling their spaces. Okay. Hopefully you've had a chance to sign in and fill out the poll question. Let's take a quick look. We had a problem right before the sign in, so I have to get back to the poll question. All right, well, while that's pulling up, we can come back to that. Before we jump into the research results, I want to take a moment to contextualize this conversation and remind ourselves why we're even having it. NASA's been reporting to us for decades now the alarming recent spike of global CO2 emissions compared to our global history. In 1950, carbon dioxide levels surpassed a point ever reached before. The spike directly correlates with a rise in the Industrial Revolution and the manufacturing boom. What's disturbing is that these CO2 levels haven't stopped peaking since 1950. The conversation has to start by acknowledging that most of our economy is based on burning fossil fuels. Oil to run our transportation sector and burning coal and natural gas to power our homes and our factories. And because we're burning more fossil fuels than ever before, we've started going to very risky extraction methods to sustain our new habits, such as offshore drilling, fracking, mountaintop removal, and tar sands. Plastic industries are deeply connected to this spike, with 99% of chemicals sourced for plastic production coming from fossil fuels. And just as the world is beginning to realize the dangers of plastic pollution, the industry is actually poised to invest billions in expanding its production. Meanwhile, it's collecting in our oceans, in beaches, and wildlife forms are starving on full stomachs of broken down plastic bits. And recycling is not our savior. The truth is that only 10% of all plastic ever produced has ever been recycled because it's not profitable to do so. On top of this, there's more of us. The global population has tripled in the past 70 years, and we're consuming more products from animals that release another pollutant called methane. So as sunlight penetrates into our atmosphere, all these gases we're releasing trap more and more with the sun's heat and cause global warming or the greenhouse effect. But the concern isn't just that the Earth is getting warmer, it's that it's happening far too quickly. The United Nations says that right now, our world is about 1 degree Celsius hotter than previous industrial times, which is actually okay. In fact, if we start warming by 1.5 or even 2 degrees by 2100, that would be fine. But again, the problem is speed. Because right now, we're on track to hit a 1.5 degree increase by 2030. We're actually on pace to hit our peak target in less than 10 years, instead of the 80-year pace that was deemed still within reason. That's the trajectory we're already on. And if we don't slow down the warming, it could mean catastrophe within my lifetime and maybe yours too. And we're already getting a taste of this. On the other hand, there is positive momentum. There's more awareness and some industries are making progress. But experts say what's needed now that's bigger than ever is a big push to change everything about the way that we're running our world. So what does this mean for us in the built environment industry? We already know buildings alone are currently responsible for 40% of all carbon emissions in the world. So it's literally our responsibility to get this right. Architecture 2030 was established in 2002 with the mission to rapidly transform our industry from a major contributor of greenhouse gas emissions to a central solution to the climate crisis. Therefore, the AIA created the 2030 commitment as a framework that provides standardized tools for US firms to track their progress towards achieving carbon neutral construction by 2030. But as we decrease our building emissions with greener energy and more efficient fixtures, we can't stop at patting ourselves on the back for using LED. The bottom line is business as usual has got to change. Boasting high efficacies is no longer enough. We're at the point now where we have to start considering the greenhouse gases that are emitted to construct our luminaires in the first place, or the embodied carbon. Embodied carbon is the sum of all greenhouse gas emissions resulting from the mining, harvesting, processing, manufacturing, transportation, and installation of building materials. Depending on how it's measured, it can encompass cradle to gate, cradle to grave, or even cradle to cradle. Embodied carbon matters just as much as energy efficiency and renewables. That's because the emissions we produce between now and 2050 will determine if we meet the goals of the 2015 Paris Climate Accord and prevent the worst effects of climate change. If our perspective doesn't shift on how we prioritize embodied carbon, estimates show that impacts will total 90% of carbon released from newly constructed buildings between 2015 and 2050, which means we could miss our global warming goals completely. So the expert advice is to focus on the hotspots or materials that contribute the most to building or a product's embodied greenhouse gas emissions. You might have been asking yourself earlier what a dead bird has to do with you and lighting, but the materials our products are made of and where they go at the end of their life matters. When we focus on the hotspots, project teams can prioritize products made from materials that make more of a difference and can source design solutions from manufacturers that have the biggest impacts. So it's really down to all of us to change our ways in the world of lighting and to shake things up, or climate change is going to do it for us. So with this context, you kind of start to ask yourself, well, what can I do? Where do I fit in? At Slade and Feinstein, I approached a couple of our principals, Josh and Reiko, and we began having conversations about what was in our realm of influence. What can we be doing to take ownership of our part? And out of these conversations, along with some expert advice along the way, came a letter we wrote with a 10-minute survey attached, which many of you tuning in were gracious enough to fill out. This letter and survey circulated with the support of our local reps to 167 lighting manufacturers that service the New England region. Of the 167, we received results back from 109 manufacturers, giving us a 65% response rate, making our gathered data statistically significant. The letter and survey covered 3 main areas of impact. Oh, somebody just entered. So the areas we looked at were material transparency, climate impact, and social health and equity. Our panel discussion today will focus on material transparency, but we'll break down the more significant areas of focus as we review the survey results. Let's start with the declare label. The declare label is essentially an ingredients label for building products. It looks at a product's materiality from extraction to end of life and gets at, is it good for people and the planet? It answers 3 simple questions. Where does the product come from? What is it made of at the end of, or what is it made of, and where does it go at the end of its life? The label is broken down into 3 main sections. The top portion lists products and manufacturer information and life cycle information. You'll find data such as the final assembly location, which is useful when trying to source local products that will have to travel smaller distances to job sites. It also includes embodied carbon, the product's life expectancy, and end-of-life options, which essentially is how to responsibly dispose of the product once it's reached its end of life. End-of-life options can include take-back programs, calling out salvageable or reusable parts, and percentages of the product that are recyclable, landfill, or hazardous waste. The middle section is the ingredient reporting. Declare requires the reporting of at least 99% of all intentionally added ingredients to 100 parts per million. Ingredients without restriction appear in gray, chemicals on the red list appear in dark orange, and EPA chemicals of concern appear in light orange. The bottom portion is the LBC, or Living Building Challenge Criteria Summary, and optional third-party verification information. The product is then added to the open online Declare database. This can be really powerful exposure, especially for lighting, as the database is still small. People are just beginning to form their first associations with specific lighting companies and Declare labels, which I can tell you as a specifier, those early associations really stick. It's a great way to gain visibility with design firms, especially outside of your target market, and those looking for products to meet green building goals of projects such as major corporations, healthcare, higher education institutions, and municipalities. It shows transparency with customers. It shows transparency with consumers and customers, and who really are starting to value transparency more than ever before. And it's a very simple way to provide a very complex information, yes, for the general public, but also to the designer. Specifiers and designers love simple and digestible product information. And for a little icing on top of our Declare labeled cake, it subsequently complies with product requirements for many other green building programs. Now for the juicy survey results. We found that most manufacturers were aware of or familiar with the Declare label. Now, 15% of manufacturers reported offering or being in the process of offering a Declare label, which we thought was pretty exciting. As for visibility of this information to specifiers, 10% said they were working on adding declare label information to their spec sheets, and 22% said they would consider it. We also asked about providing a product finder on their websites to filter search for declare labeled products, and 25% said they would consider adding this feature online. Looking forward, 22% of manufacturers reported that they expect to offer their first declare label in 2021. And another 20% said they would offer one within 3 years. That's over 40% of lighting companies offering a declare product within 3 years' time, which is awesome. Within the next 5 years, 26% to offer 10 plus products, 11% to expect to offer all of their products manufactured to the standard. Now, this is really quite an evolution for us in the lighting world. Companies reported a lot of interest in developing product to meet project requirements if the opportunity presented itself. And over half of the surveyed lighting companies expressed interest in learning more about the declare label. This piqued interest was really encouraging for us to see. The next part of the survey, we asked about the red list. The red list is comprised of the worst in class materials and chemicals that are ubiquitous in the built environment. There are 22 red list chemical families, which translate to over 800 individual chemical CSA registry numbers. This list is largely comprised of persistent bioaccumulative toxins, which essentially means they're synthetic compounds which nature is not able to process or get rid of very easily, and hence leave them to accumulate in the food chain. The red list is based on the precautionary principle, which is the opposite of the status quo. Right now, you have to prove that a chemical is toxic before a ban can be placed on a chemical, whereas the precautionary principle says you have to prove that a chemical is safe before it is allowed to be used, or more simply stated, better safe than sorry. This approach is taken to avoid the long delays between identification of a material risk and the regulatory action that is taken, because historically we know that it usually takes decades, as seen in the example shown. The red list and declare label have a strong tie-in together, and both stem from the Living Building Challenge, which was launched in 2006. At that time, the red list was effective in helping to identify what chemicals to avoid, but architects were unsure how to ask the right questions to the manufacturers, and manufacturers were unwilling, unsure, and at times simply unable to respond. To address this disconnect, the ILFI, or the Living Future Institute, developed the Declare program to require manufacturers to be transparent about their ingredients. Though at first there was a lot of resistance, now market-leading manufacturers are no longer grumbling about new transparency protocols, but instead they're embracing them as a method to better connect with their stakeholders, reduce risk, and get ahead of their competition. Now, with the red list, architects and designers know the right questions to ask, and with the Declare program and the normalization of transparency, manufacturers are better able to provide the right answers. So when we look more closely at what the red list means for luminaires, a couple big ticket items come up. One is the use of compliant coatings, free of BPA, phthalates, and other red list ingredients. The second is avoiding small components that contain polycarbonates. And the third is using wire casing that is PVC free. Our survey touched on this last point, so that's what we'll focus on today. So what's wrong with PVC? It seems so inert and ubiquitous that most people think of it as harmless, but it's actually a known human carcinogen. 75% of all produced PVC is used in construction material, and in light fixtures is commonly found in the wire casings. Both the production and the disposal of PVC is an issue. When it's exposed to sufficient heat or combustion, it creates dioxins, which cause cancer, endocrine disruption, neurological damage, and other health concerns. So one of the things that we've begun doing in our office is asking reps who visit if they offer alternative wire casings that are free of PVC for their products.
Hi, Mel. Could I interrupt for just a second? you please admit some people that are waiting in the lobby since you have the host right now?
Oh, I'm sorry.
No problem. Thanks.
Okay. Okay, so like I said, that's one of the things that we began asking reps that come into our office. I'm aware of 3 companies that offer PVC-free wire casings. I'm sure there are others, but there's 2 located in Massachusetts and 1 in California. Now, let's dig into the Red List survey results. We found that most manufacturers are aware or familiar with the Red List. Only 15% were not. Currently, half of the manufacturers either offer an alternative wiring or are working on offering an alternative wiring jacketing. Just 11% offer it as a standard practice for all of their products, and 24% reported an alternative is available for some or all of their products upon special request. I have to keep admitting people. All right. Oops. Okay. Let's see. So just 11% offered it as a standard practice for all of their products, and 24% reported an alternative was available for some or all of their products upon special request. As for transparency of this option to specifiers, 24%, let's see, 24% reported an alternative is available for some or all of their products upon special request. Okay, for specifiers. While only a small percentage listed as an option on their spec sheets, 24% said they would consider adding this choice, which was pretty exciting. 25% reported that they would consider this offering, adding this offering as a search criteria on their website product finders. So we found it helpful even just to be asking these questions. Looking forward, 11% of manufacturers stated they plan to offer an alternative wire casing this year. And 19% said they plan to offer this within the next 3 years. And within the next 5 years, 13% reported plans to apply an alternative wire casing to all of their products. This is really great because it means for many, the plans are already in the works. And what's even more encouraging is that after taking this survey, 32% of the companies said they would consider offering an alternative jacketing. Talk about progress. Now, when talking about completely Red List free or Red List compliant product offerings, 16% said of the manufacturers said they reported plans to offer their first product within 2021, while 23% said they would offer their first product by 2023 or within 3 years. Now let's look at some 5-year projections. By 2025, 13% of surveyed lighting companies expect to offer less than 10 Red List free or Red List compliant luminaires. 11% plan to offer more than 10 products, and 20% ambitiously reported aiming to offer all products Red List free or compliant, or what we sometimes call LBC ready. And 47% reported wanting to learn more. Now, this is really encouraging and shows that perhaps the lighting industry is on track to catch up with the rest of the architectural community and is valuing material transparency more firmly. Gives me warm fuzzies. All right, now we're going to speed things up a bit so we can move ahead with our panel discussion. But before we get there, let's take a quick look at row house. As many of you may already be aware, row house is the restriction of hazardous substances. It's a directive that originated in the European Union and restricts the use of 10 hazardous materials found in electrical and electronic products. A common connection to luminaires that we think of is the use of lead, which is also on the red list, for soldering small components and on circuit boards. As one might guess, almost all of the manufacturers were familiar with row house. Most manufacturers have row house compliant luminaire offerings. 16% did not. 30% of manufacturers currently provide row house compliant data on specification sheets. 13% recorded currently working on this, and 40% said they would consider it. As for the ability to search for row house compliant products on company websites, 47% said manufacturers said they would consider adding this feature to their online product offerings. Just a small percentage currently offer this ability. As for a 5-year look ahead, 53% of manufacturers expect all of their products to be row house compliant by 2025, and 22% of manufacturers were interested in learning more about this directive. And this brings us to our climate impact portion of the survey, where we focused on EPDs, or environmental product declarations. An EPD verifies the environmental impact of a life cycle of a product. The foundation of an EPD is an LCA, or a life cycle assessment. LCAs consider the full value chain of a product from raw material extraction through the manufacturing process, its usage stage, and finally, its end of life. PCRs, or product category rules, are protocols as to how life cycle assessments should be conducted based on the type of product. So if we look at the relationship between these three together, we're back to a food and nutrition analogy. Let's say that our product being evaluated is a cookie. The product category rules would be the recipe, if you will, setting the standard of what to count or how to study, or rather in this case, bake. The life cycle assessment study would quantify the impacts or process of making the cookie from start to finish. So looking at where each ingredient came from, how it was processed, where the cookie was, and how the cookie was consumed, et cetera. And the resulting environmental product declaration would parallel a nutrition label, reporting the impacts of the cookie, or in this case of a product, the environmental impact. There are two types of EPDs: general, which is average data across several manufacturers and products, and specific EPDs, which look at a specific manufacturer and product line. Our survey asked about the latter. We found that manufacturers are generally somewhat familiar with EPDs. Just under 8% reported offering any product-specific EPDs, and this information was not on their product specification sheets. When asked about general corporate commitments to reduce carbon emissions, just about half of the manufacturers reported having such commitments established. The final section of our survey covered social health and equity areas of impact. We asked manufacturers about their familiarity with the ILFI Just label and certified B corporations. Just as the Declare label was a nutrition label for products, Just is a nutrition label for organizations. It's a voluntary transparency platform to disclose a company's operations, including how they treat employees and where they make final community investments. The Just label aims to create a common language and measurement framework for social justice issues. The label is organized into 6 general categories, which include diversity and inclusion, employee benefits, equity, stewardship, employee health, and purchasing and supply chain. We found that 67% of manufacturers were not familiar with the Just label, and 6% were currently in pursuit of a Just label, but 65% were interested in learning more about the platform. And finally, we asked about B Corps. Certified B corporations remind me of the concept of a triple bottom line economics of people, planet, and profit, rather than our institutional single bottom line economics of just profit. They set forth a new kind of business model that balances profit with purpose and are helping to shift the cultural paradigm to redefine what it means to be successful in business and build a more inclusive and sustainable economy. Our survey results indicated that 23% of manufacturers were interested in becoming a B Corp. Aside from a formal label, 44% of companies questioned currently have policies in place that support the well-being of their employees, and 28% reported such policies were under development. All right, this concludes our survey findings. We've made it to the end. I will stop sharing my screen, and we will introduce you to the panels. Is the panel pinned? Okay. Today we have two panelists representing the manufacturer's perspective for us. The first is Scott Soresen, who is the VP of Sales and Marketing at Bega North America. Scott has been in the lighting industry for over 20 years and is currently pursuing a PhD in global leadership and change. We also have Karen Just Lindsley, who is the co-founder and CEO of Lindsley Lighting. Karen brings a unique perspective from her background in brand management and strategic planning from her life before lighting, where she ran a very successful management consulting company. Representing the design perspective, we have Alexandra Gadawaski, who is a designer and sustainability leader at HMFH Architects. She has a background in energy consumption and voluntary building standards and is also the president of our local IES chapter. Next, we have Reiko Kagawa, who is a principal at Slade & Feinstein. Reiko is known for constantly pushing the limits of lighting designers' role in a project's vision and sustainable footprint, as well as advocating for occupant well-being. As some of you may have noticed, originally Renda Cherny, the Declare label specialist at ILFI, was to be joining us, but due to unforeseen circumstances, had to step away at the last minute. But Tristan Roberts has graciously stepped in at the 11th hour and is representing the voice of material transparency expert for us. Tristan is responsible for leading staff support for HPDC's technical committee, education programs, and the evolution of the HPD open standard. And I am Melissa Mattis, or Mel, as many of you know me. I'm a senior lighting designer and the sustainability liaison at Slade & Feinstein, and a Living Future ambassador for ILFI. I have a big heart for design activism that I like to exercise through my profession as a lighting designer. And I'll be moderating the conversation this evening. So Reiko, we'll begin with you. Where does the need for material transparency currently stand in the practice of lighting design and architecture?
Sure, thanks for asking that question, important question. I have two folds of the question, two folds to this answer. So first portion is me as citizen of the global good citizen of the global earth, and I try to do better things for the earth. And because that's what I believe, I read nutrition facts because I care what I eat, what I feed my family. I reduce my waste, and then I recycle where it is applicable in an appropriate way. And then I do that because I care about those things. And when I am putting my lighting designer's hat, that whole good citizen to be on this planet of Earth really becomes a really difficult practice to be a good citizen, because I don't have a lot of information about the product. So even though I have bigger duty and also the amount of the responsibility that I should be carrying when I am specifying a large quantity of the products for the project, behalf of clients' interest, I don't have that like informative decision that I can make because of the lack of information out there. So that is a big dilemma. Then the second part is, it's not that it's impossible, I know this, because I have worked on that Living Building Challenge project, and then it has a long way to get there, but we have a way of getting all products with red list free and then all the criteria to be met. But that practice is not part of the regular practice of the manufacturing process. So it is still treated as a special order, which I really like to see it as everyday practice. So that's twofold to like what I am seeing the difficulty in the current industry.
Thank you. Alexandra, from your perspective, where does the need for material transparency currently stand?
So at our firm over the last number of years, we've been working really hard to update our material library and our specifications to reflect our sustainability goals and what we consider to be best practices. We've been looking for EPDs, HPDs, and declare labels, sort of considering red list free to be our highest goal. We primarily do public work, so to add a level of complication to that, we are always looking for 3 equal products. We've had a lot of success looking at interior products, but when we move out of the interiors realm, it becomes much more challenging. We're also working to integrate life cycle assessment. And I think, with, as you mentioned, issues around carbon, I think that's something that people are going to be trying to do more and more. In order to really do a full life cycle assessment of a building, we need EPDs for the products that we are considering. So that's, an area that we consider to be a gap right now. But I think interior products and the availability of this information has increased dramatically over the last 5 years. So I think that's a really positive example and something that I hope can be replicated in all product categories.
Thank you. Karen, what can you add from the manufacturer's perspective on this need for material transparency?
I think it's a really important question for manufacturers to be asking of themselves. We see the lighting industry as being in the fairly early stages of adoption of material transparency and adopting label standards. When we started our company 10 years ago, we started it with a mission of sustainable manufacturing. At that time, there were no standards in the US. We looked around, we thought, where are we going to draw this information from? And we couldn't find it. So we looked to Europe and we identified RoHS. And initially it was RoHS 1, and now we're up to RoHS 3 in terms of the standards for sustainable manufacturing. And so we adopted those standards. But what we found is that while we were really excited about being a green, sustainable manufacturer, the lighting community wasn't quite ready for it initially. So that message fell a little flat initially, but we've been really encouraged in the last couple of years. There are corporations with sustainability initiatives, and they want the products that go into their buildings to have sustainable materials. And we're also finding with Living Building Challenge projects that now the awareness of this opportunity is becoming more and more common. So we're excited to see that progress.
Thank you. Scott, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, good evening, everyone. I would say our experience has been very similar to Karen's. From a purely market-driven perspective, we currently receive very little pull from material transparency, at least as it stands today. And don't get me wrong, the occasional declaration request does come in from time to time, and we're able to address them. But for the most part, it feels like economic forces have yet to take over. I would back that up with, I do believe we're at an inflection point, and I see the architectural design community playing an ever increasing and critical role in human, social, and environmental health. And I think that community wields the power to expedite change for the good. So I fully expect material transparency to become the norm, not the exception in the not too distant future.
Yeah, we thought the same when we started this conversation, just seeing where the architectural industry was and where we need to catch up in lighting. So I think this conversation is part of that transition. Tristan, we've been talking about where we stand currently, but where do you think we need to be in the next 5 years?
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Appreciate being here. I checked this week. There are currently about a dozen declare labels, I think, for luminaires, and about as many published HPDs. So we're at a very small number in this category compared to other product categories that have been leading the way in material health and transparency. And that's great. It's a great opportunity. I think there are other progress has been made in this area. But over the next 5 years, I'd love to see, if we could get over 500 HPDs published on similar number of declare labels, with product variations accounted for on these labels, that could account for thousands of luminaires and related products. And what that does, not just give project teams choices on looking for red list free products for their projects, but what that does is create a tremendous amount of data on what the chemistry is in these products that currently manufacturers frankly don't even know. Researchers and those that are helping develop products and develop green chemistry in this area, we don't even know at this point what the chemistry is of these products. Just generating a lot of data over the next 5 years allows us to do that, and then over the coming decades really optimize these products for human health and reduced environmental impact.
Thank you. Alexandra, from a designer's perspective, where do you hope us to be?
To build off what was said previously, I think widespread transparency and information about the products we're specifying is really the first step in allowing us to make informed decisions. So I really hope that over the next 5 years, we can sort of channel the power of numbers and have a large group of design professionals really pushing this issue and asking for it on all projects. And hopefully that will sort of shift the dial and that this will become, more commonplace.
Rico, do you have anything to add to this?
Sure. This is kind of like the similar evolution that we saw on LEED like 15 years ago, when the LEED started to push entire design community to the notion of the sustainable design, and then we struggled, but we really came on board with that. In the digesting that to the lighting industry, we no longer specify fluorescent products because it's the higher efficacy that the LED offers is so much more attractive, and also the clean products. So it's the same way that now I fully support LED products, and now the how it's being made and what is in it is going to be the next things that we'll be focusing on. So just the same way that we started and like where we are on the shift on the energy efficiency, we're not going back. We're going to be now only shifting towards to the new direction of knowing what the materials is in a product, so that we can make educated decision. I think that's not going back.
Right. Scott, from a manufacturer's perspective, where do you hope to be in 5 years?
A big question. As I kind of reflect on that, there's several paths that open up to us, but I think if I were going to pick one word, it would be alignment. And so what do I mean by that, right? As with most progress, innovation, technology, it's been my personal experience that laws and regulations are usually the last thing to catch up, right? And what we have here is an instance where forces for good don't necessarily align. And so if I unpack that a little bit, as a taxpayer, right, I can fully get behind 3 name specifications for public projects and the power this has to manage costs. And as a citizen of planet Earth, I can wholly believe in the need for material transparency. But let's say we have 2 manufacturers on this call that fully embrace the declare label, and a third does not emerge in a needed product category for a project. Well, now we have an instance where the declare label can't be specified as a requirement. We're not able to celebrate the companies that are seemingly doing things right. And I think aligning these forces for good will make a big difference.
Karen, any comments on where you think we need to be in 5 years?
I think we need to significantly raise awareness across all participants in the specification of lighting. So that goes to building owners, tenants, and people who are going to occupy buildings. It expands to lighting manufacturers, lighting designers, engineers, everybody involved, even distributors and contractors who are involved in the specification and installation of lighting. And I think that awareness and education needs to take place across every single group. They're going to need slightly different messages because they have different requirements that they are looking at. And I think we have an opportunity to really listen to upcoming generations, people who are millennials and upcoming Gen Z. They want to live and work in healthy places. And so they are going to demand that the places that they work in, the places that they live in, have healthy building materials used in them. So I think we can also use that consumer-driven segment as another constituency that we need to educate and then respond to. So I think we have a lot of opportunities to do a lot of education, and to correspond with what Scott said with alignment. I think that will contribute to this sense of alignment. But we have a lot of work to do.
And as a manufacturer, do you take responsibility for doing part of that education, educating like both designers and just general public?
Wow, that is such a great question. When we first launched our company, we were so excited, and we went out and we were telling everybody about how we were a green lighting company. We wrote a green lighting manifesto, and we were really dismayed at the lack of interest. And so what we found is that we soft pedaled it. So we didn't get that message out as much because we thought that the quality and construction and performance of our fixtures was way more important. But now with that tide shifting, we're becoming louder in our willingness to talk about this and to bring up this and to help in that education effort. I think that everybody is going to need to find a voice to be able to share this message and to help people understand the benefits to them for embracing material transparency and sustainable manufacturing.
Thank you. Rico, how did you come to hold your sustainably based values as a practice, and where are your current and planned practices?
Yeah, so in the current, recent month, I guess, we started to ask more and more questions to the clients that can we include the specification of one product that has material transparency? And hopefully that's the sizable fixture that has actually bigger volume within that project. But having that one product that might be starting with the one products, and then that might not get us to the living building challenge or something that is like a bigger goal, but it does make a sizable change on what we do and also like the specification that we provide. And also more importantly, that also plant a seed to the client that this is something that we care. And then that seed also might be expanded to their idea in a bigger direction. So we were really bringing those conversations to the clients these days and hoping to get like one spec to have the material transparency to move this forward.
Big spec, one spec with big quantity. Alexandra, I'll ask you the same. Can you tell us a little bit about how you came to hold these values and what your current or planned practices are?
For sure. So on a personal level, when I was finishing my undergrad, which would have been 2008, 2009, I feel like these issues started to seem incredibly urgent and important. And at that time, I decided to do a master's in environmental design and really pursue this, and actually ended up going to the UK because that seemed like a really great example, because I think Europe was ahead of where we were with research, and it felt like rather than seeing this as an insurmountable problem, it was this great example of progress that can be made and these really big ideas that I could bring back. So really that's my interest started in undergrad. And on a professional level, we're primarily working on designing public K-12 schools. And so as well as, sustainability, we're also really focused on occupant well-being and ideas of equity and the relationship to those things to environmental challenges. And the idea that every student deserves a healthy learning environment, and that's something that we should be providing in all of our projects. And related to that, I have a colleague who says this all the time, but students are not small adults. Children respond to the materials in their environment differently than adults, so it's very important to consider consider those impacts. And also children interact with their environments differently than adults. They're touching and interacting with all kinds of materials. So it's really important to consider those impacts. You know, and in terms of moving forward, I think one of the things that's really important is that we have typically a large group of consultants on our projects, and everyone has their own expertise. And we'd really like to work on integrating all the disciplines and making sure that everyone is on board with project sustainability goals and providing you know, their specific input in their fields to really advance this holistically in our buildings.
Thank you. Scott, how did Bega come to hold sustainable values as a business practice?
Well, on a personal level, this started many, many years ago for me. A dear friend and mentor sent me down the sustainability path as we started to prepare for a symposium on the same subject. And generally, I see you in the audience tonight. That led me to books like Natural Capitalism, Green to Gold, Mid-Course Correction, Cradle to Cradle. I just fell in love with this whole idea and this thought that, you know, maybe doing things right and doing the right thing can converge, right? And so relate that to where we're at Bega now. You know, as a company with German heritage, as a California-based company, this is in our DNA. How does that manifest? You know, we don't really advertise it, but we're almost finished with a journey to zero landfill. We've finished the design phase to produce at minimum 90% of our energy with renewables on site. We have, it's something that is lived a lot less than it's marketed. And, you know, I think going back to, are we into sharing that and educating that and marketing that? The answer would always be yes, when people are ready to receive it, right?
Karen, you mentioned Lindsley Lighting was founded on sustainable principles. How do you relate the sustainable business practice back to your employees?
We are constantly, because we started as a sustainable company and we had to ask ourselves, what does it mean to be sustainable? We are forever challenging ourselves to say, what does it truly mean to be sustainable? So first we looked at materials, and then we looked at how far did it take to get materials from their point of origin to our factory. And then we looked at packaging. But then we had to look at the people element as well. And then we started looking at initiatives like, how do we make sure that we have sustainable benefits for our employees so that they have time off for their families, so that they can have good healthcare benefits. And then also to look at, you know, what does it take to make sure that we have a sustainable environment for them to work in, so that, you know, one of the benefits of being a sustainable manufacturer is you don't have any hazard materials that your employees interact with. We then took it to another step. What does it take what does it mean to have a living wage? And so we made sure that all of our employees have living wages so that they can lead their best lives, and then a series of mentorships so that we can constantly help them to be better at what they do, and also give us an opportunity to listen to their recommendations on how we can be better. So we are fully integrated in terms of listening to our people and then responding and trying to make sure that we meet all of their needs in a very holistic, sustainable way.
Thank you. Let me ask you another question. How do you justify the cost of labeling and supply chain changes in a business or like to your client?
I think that we had the benefit of starting from scratch. So because we only make things in a sustainable way, we found that we were able to produce our products without any additional costs than if we weren't producing them sustainably. And that's because we went to the root level. I think if you have existing processes and materials that you are using, it is much harder to make that switch. So I think that helps us a lot. We do have the added cost of doing things like a declare label. And that is a much bigger burden on a smaller manufacturer than it is on a larger manufacturer. For a larger manufacturer, the cost of getting all of your products declare label, like they can sneeze at that. we have to take a harder look, and it's going to take us much more time and resources to do something like that. But that, you know, we probably may decide, we haven't done it yet, but we certified that all of our stuff is sustainably produced. But to go to that next step, it is a barrier, I think, to smaller companies. And I think that we all need to be mindful that innovation frequently comes from smaller, more entrepreneurially thinking companies. And I would hate for us to be so hung up on what we're doing in terms of labeling that we are discouraging those people who have dreams of creating a business that will contribute to this conversation.
Yeah, thank you for representing that point of view. Tristan, can you speak to the cost differential between a Declare label and HPD?
Certainly. Actually, I don't know offhand the cost of a Declare label. I think I have an idea of it, but I don't want to misquote that. I can tell you HPD costs about $50 to publish, just in terms of the cost for the publishing. There's some time to the manufacturer to gather the information, and if you work with a consultant, then depending on the complexity of the product, it can be larger. But it's just a matter of the manufacturer gathering information, which could be fairly easily at hand, or can take many steps with suppliers. But we find that the cost is just a matter of time, and that manufacturers are pretty able to justify the cost if they're getting some requests for it. And the publishing cost is negligible. So getting in the door on that, I talk about this being a journey, not a destination, that material transparency and optimization takes many steps. So starting off with a self-declared HPD, very negligible cost, and then you learn things and you get interested and you start to, I don't think there's folks on the panel can corroborate this, I imagine, but most manufacturers that I know don't choose to want to poison their customers. So when they find out there's something in the product that may be a health concern, they want to get it out. And these inquiries lead to curiosity like that.
Thank you. Scott, I have the same question for you about justifying the cost of transparency labels and maybe more so supply chain changes.
Yeah, I think Karen was spot on. I have typically experienced that while it might be a more complex system to build, doing things right usually costs less and earns more over time. I think also I'm on a theoretical level, you mentioned the triple bottom line theory earlier. TBL accounting frameworks would suggest the cost of not getting this right might be greater than anything we see on a cost of goods sold arena.
Right.
And I think we need to look at the consumer level as well. Like, who among us wouldn't spend a fraction more to know planet Earth was safe, right? As a company that doesn't compete on price, and I can tell you there are a lot of us willing to pay more to get more. And while it might not be in this lifetime, I do believe that companies that don't share these values are eventually going to find themselves without a market to serve.
Thank you. Tristan, how do you see the Declare label or HPDs or other similar transparency initiatives impacting the lighting industry?
Well, I think if you look at the history with other industries that have been impacted, there's will be a call to step up and for manufacturers to publish these labels. And that will lead to innovation, as we can see with manufacturers here that are designing products from the ground up to avoid toxic chemicals. And there is opportunity for innovation. I think a lot of innovation in this industry has been based on efficiency and aesthetics, but there's opportunity for innovation with avoiding toxic chemicals. But what will happen, I would predict, is that we will again learn what the toxic chemicals are that are most commonly used in these products. We have some ideas of what those are. And those become the focus of innovation for green chemists and manufacturers, and also NGOs that want to bring focus on this. And I just want to add, this has all been mostly driven by voluntary market initiatives, such as LEED, the Living Building Challenge related programs. This is everyone here just wants to innovate and do better. And this is, I think will change this industry considerably over the next decade.
Thank you. Reiko, do you have anything to add to Tristan's comments regarding similar transparency initiatives and the impact on the lighting industry?
Pertains to the labels and to, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, so the as Scott mentioned, that there's regulation and doing the good doesn't really go always together, or like doesn't go in the same timing. But what it's really nice about the certification or labels that we could see is it builds now the trust between the specifier to the manufacturer, because that disclosure of all material, that means that like there's the good thoughts going into like review what they are using it, just like Tristan mentioned. So that is the one thing that like we could trust, that like they're open and like disclosing that like what they know. And then that builds not just only the material transparency, but also the trust that we can have that like this manufacturer is actually making the products in a way that we can actually trust in all aspects, the business aspects, the performance aspects, and of course to the material transparency. So having the label sounds like just a label, but it'll go so much more than just a material transparency.
Thank you. Alexandra, do you have anything to add?
I think what I would just like to add with the idea of labeling is that I think once this sort of picks up momentum, it has the possibility to snowball really quickly. And I think, other industries, we've seen that happen. And I think, there's elements of it that might seem daunting, and a few people have talked about those challenges. But I think, asking for this information about your products really has the possibility to make this something that over the course of the next 5 years could be widely available, and something that we're using to make decisions on all our projects.
Thank you. We have one final question that might be the most important, definitely the one I'm most excited about. But it's, what can we do today to make small steps towards our larger goals? And how can we make an effort to celebrate these small steps? Scott, we'll start with you.
Oh goodness, no pressure. I would encourage everybody to take this on with an internal locus of control. Right? What can I do? I would say start. Right. So congratulations, Slade and Feinstein. That's exactly what you did, and that's why we're all here today. I would say on a subject like this, it's something so important. There is no such thing as failure. There's only learning. Right. So let's all start learning a lot and fast. And let's all give each other the space to believe that there's more than one right answer as we go after this, right? So I really just like the word start. Oftentimes we think global problems have global solutions. And if we start with ourselves, I think we're going to find ourselves pretty far down the road very quickly.
Alexandra, from a designer's perspective, what can we do to make these small steps, and how can they be celebrated?
I think I'd sort of divide this into two categories. I think the advocacy and asking for it is really important, asking for it on a product basis, but I think also advocating for standards to require this and to include lighting. People have mentioned LEED and how that moved the market, really looping, for example, requiring material declarations in those kind of standards and mandating that it include lighting, mechanical, electrical, plumbing, all of the disciplines. I think that has the power to move the dial. And on a personal level, I think it's picking targets on your project and sort of, if you could have your most commonly used fixture, the thing that you specify the most often, hitting your goals, I think that would be a big win and a great place to start.
Rachel, do you have anything else to add from the designer's perspective?
Yeah. So this is not something that we can accomplish overnight or like in a short time, but we have to go for a long time to get this right. And then I really cherish my allies. It's really happy to have colleague who I can share these moments together, and also everybody here joining and then learning more about it is really something that we can all celebrate. And I love the fact that this voice is becoming louder and louder, and we should cherish this. And then one of the things that I want to mention is when we ask those questions, then it plant a seed to another person and then raise more awareness. Like, can you provide a material transparency to the rep and to the manufacturer? They start to think, why do they need that? and then that effect goes a lot farther than just going through the spec sheet. So that whole process of making more awareness by asking the questions and celebrating each other's small steps that making it happen, I think that's really wonderful that we want to keep doing.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree. I think, just the power that we have of like asking those questions, like especially as specifiers, like asking our reps, asking our manufacturers, and even offering feedback to manufacturers that we want to hear what they're doing to be a part of this. To Karen's point, that we do care. I think those messages go a long way, and that's something that we can start doing today, immediately, which is quite powerful. And it actually kind of reminds me of like the analogy of spending. Just like every dollar that we spend is a vote towards what we want to see more of. Every specification on our schedule has the same power. And luckily, advocacy is a color of light that everybody looks good in. So, and as Scott said, or I don't know if he said it on this conversation, but he's definitely said it on others, that may this conversation be one of many. So at this point, I think we will open up for Q&A. Josh Feinstein has been moderating the chat for us. So if Josh can be unmuted.
Melissa,
yes.
Could I get a chance on that last question?
I'm sorry, yes, please, Tristan.
I would just like to make a plug for harmonization, and that's the effort that the Health Product Declaration Collaborative, HPDC, our organization, is leading. Declare labels, HPDs, cradle to cradle. Manufacturers have many choices of programs to participate in. Architects and designers have many choices of things to request. What our organization is doing uniquely that I would ask you to support by asking for HPDs and publishing HPDs is harmonizing, standardizing these requests so that manufacturers, when they publish an HPD, they know that they're following the same set of rules, that then that same data can be used to produce a declare label, produce a cradle-to-cradle certification, be used to lead well, living building challenge, all these programs. This will bring down the cost to manufacturers to participate when you have thousands and thousands of luminaires that one manufacturer may be producing and other electrical products. Brings down your cost, makes more products available to designers that want to make these choices. And ultimately, whether you prefer different certifications or labels, that's cool. But it starts, in our view, and we work with all these organizations with a harmonized, standardized data request, which we're driving. So I'd ask for your support on that.
Thank you. Okay, Josh, would you like to ask or funnel any of the questions to the panelists?
Sure. So the first question we have is from Adam Kibbe, and he's asking, since most THHN and Romex includes PVC, as I understand it, how does the luminaire internal wiring compare by volume? I think it's minuscule. So Adam, volume compared to other PVC wiring and other.
I'm just saying there's an awful lot of building wiring and not very much luminaire wiring. I don't mean to be a wet blanket, but I feel like we're, how could we affect that part of the equation? It would really have been a better question to ask.
Right.
Let's do it all. I don't think we have to choose the same, companies that are producing cabling that is free PVC. I believe they can produce the cabling for those luminaires as well as for building wiring, and the more volume that they get, the more requests they get, the more innovation demand for that. I would think if cabling that's PVC free is reduced in cost, for buildings in general would be the benefit to small luminaire companies that can utilize that as well.
Adam has a follow-up question. And did you find that the positive responses aware of and or participating, and I think this is responses to our questionnaire, varied by publicly held companies versus privately held companies? I don't know if we broke down
That wasn't
that
a
data.
filter that we studied.
Yeah, so.
Any
no,
gut feeling?
No,
No.
that wasn't a metric that was looked at.
So Ira Rothman has a question. Similar to plastic parts being a hazard to animal health, is there any known data available about existing lighting product materials that off-gas, et cetera, that will directly help drive the need for changes within the manufacturing process? I think that came up with us, like even the PVC wiring has dust that, I think Tristan, you had mentioned that, or someone had, even the PVC itself could create dust within an enclosed home or office, causing problems.
Yeah, I'm not aware of specific research that specifically ties this to luminaires, but the kinds of flame retardants that are used in casings, not just the PVC itself, but really more over the plasticizers and phthalates in the wire jacketing, those kinds of things are well documented to be present in dust, which then gets into our bodies through not just breathing, but just absorbing directly through the skin. If you look at the prevalence, if you've, I hate to bring up, it's a very sad topic, but many of us have had cats and dogs that have died of horrible cancers, and think about the time they spend licking the floor. Our pets, cats that spend time on the floor licking themselves. It's picked up through the building through all these different sources, and this is just one of the ways that we can address this.
Our next question is from Tanya Hernandez. Awesome program. Have you surveyed the specification community regarding empathetic lighting? It would be great to understand not just the motivation, but the demand. Also wondering how much of an adder would be palatable for products that meet red list free or is declare listed. How much of an adder? Okay. So I don't believe our survey specification community. Okay, so have you surveyed the specification community regarding empathetic lighting?
I'm not sure what that question means specifically.
Hi, it's Tanya. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. No, I was wondering, so you surveyed the manufacturing community. I was asking about specifiers in general, lighting designers, folks who actually specify. Have you guys been surveyed to say, hey, a $15 adder on a product is fine because we care so much about this? So that's what I'm curious about.
No, but I would love to be asked that question.
Yes, we have not.
Okay, thank you.
Future survey.
That would be a great follow-up survey though. Tanya has a follow-up question. Is the declare label the right proxy for empathetic lighting practices? Karen mentioned that companies have many sustainable practices, some that don't necessarily count for declare EPD or HPD. Education will be key. Who do you believe is most responsible for the education needed for the industry to move forward toward a more sustainable lighting?
I'd be willing to at least start an answer on that. I think I believe that the IES is a fantastic forum for starting this conversation. So we're doing this in Boston. I think, we have IES chapters, sections all over the country. And I think that that is a great way to start this conversation because it encompasses everybody who's involved in lighting. Rep agencies, manufacturers, specifiers. And I think that as we build this conversation, we'll be able to come up with good answers on exactly what is the right way of demonstrating material transparency. I completely understand the value of the declare label as a standardized methodology for communicating. I think if I pretend to put a lighting designer hat on my head and am thinking about my interface with a client, I could really see where it would be very easy to then say, hey, take a look. These products all have declare label. Boom, boom, boom. And it makes that a very easy conversation. But I do think we should have a large tent and talk about sustainability initiatives in general, because it's far greater than just what we can encompass on a label. But I'd like to see this happen all over the country. These conversations are where it starts.
I'll piggyback off of that. I think the IES, I agree that they are an amazing source to that can really be a point place for all of us in the industry to provide more leadership on like how lighting fits into these different initiatives. And like, I think it's going to come down to each manufacturer looking at what their own goals are with material transparency. I think the declare label might be right for some, and it won't be right for others. But that's not the only option. And I don't mean to overemphasize declare. I think how Tristan has talked about the HPD being a very economical option as well, like has just as much power. So I think the conversation is really how are we being more transparent about our products, and I think the IES could be very helpful in kind of providing more leadership in that way.
Mel, it's Ira. I just wanted to add to the comment, and I know that Pat McGillicuddy is on the call, and she's staff member of the IES who's involved with committees, and I'm a pretty active member of the IES. And I was just curious, Pat, if you might just add comment, if you don't mind me putting you on the spot, to just share if you know if the sustainability committee of the IES has had any conversations at all related to this subject matter or not?
Yes, they've all been invited to participate. And Alexandra sits on the board. I've asked them to be an advisory member, and we're in current conversations with them. They've been working really hard on a recent document that they've released that we hope to continue reviewing and produce another version of within the year. So that is definitely in the works.
Excellent. Our next question is from Jeffrey Boynton. Which organizations or institutions can or are funding the kind of research needed to measure the impact of different choices? This would include both materials and design direction, such as wired versus wireless, internal driver versus remote driver, etc. So are there organizations or institutions currently funding this research for these different choices of materials and design? I'm not aware.
I'm not either.
No. Well, it's just an excellent question, but
it is.
There's not an excellent answer yet, which I think is an answer in and of itself.
I think this a little bit relates to, Tristan, you were saying you had looked at the number of HPDs and declare labels available. I think to be able to make those decisions, we really need a larger number of products providing this information so that, you know, we can evaluate that.
Yeah, take the carpeting industry, you know, which has been leading the way on sustainability since the 1990s, and in that area we have hundreds of these labels and declarations that tell us exactly what chemicals are used. We can compare in that product category. We can look at you know, resins and binders and look at what are the least toxic or the more toxic chemicals that show up in those roles, and that's then work that a chemist can say, okay, I see that this industry has a need for this kind of chemical that performs this function. You can see that they have a toxic chemical. Let's look at, let's do research and look at where we can replace that. And we know of, I can point you to, you know, several different universities, for example, including Arizona State University, that takes quite an interest in that. It's generating some data. That's why, you know, my question to what we need in the next 5 years will give a running start to those, whether they be academic or internal R&D researchers that want to make those replacements in green chemistry innovations.
And I will I will say that you mentioned Arizona. I know Parsons is doing a lot of material research through their material lab, and so I think that's not a lot of lighting specific research, but they do have a lot of really great research on chemicals and interaction with occupants, and so that there are certainly research, if not particularly lighting specific.
We have one other question. Will the recording be made available for all attendees? Yes, this is being recorded and will be available to everybody that's attended. Also want to make sure everybody's aware that within the chat box, there's some excellent links that have been put in for different committees and information that you will want to look at. Let's see. We have from,
Just gonna.
oh yeah.
So I was just going to say we have reached our hour and a half. So I am just going to share the AIA form. I think we should continue this conversation, but if anyone wants to leave, I'm going to put that form in the chat now. So if you'd like AIA credit or a certificate, please fill out that form. I'll turn it back over to you, Josh, for more questions. But if people needed to leave, I didn't want them to miss out on their credits.
We have, let's see. Chapman from Brownlee is asking, perhaps the panel could put together a list of what you care most about, a top 5 or top 10 list of harmful materials most commonly found in lighting fixtures. Number 1, PVC, etc. Manufacturers have to start somewhere, and identifying the low-hanging fruit may help smaller companies get their start. Excellent, excellent point. And then Meredith says, I'll add that HPDs and declare are not equals and each have a place. There's also cradle to cradle certification. It's not necessarily about choosing between, but rather understanding the differences. It's an excellent clarification.
Yeah,
thank you.
Josh, can I add something to that?
Yes.
I think that when we look at the materials we use, it's not just the materials we use, it's the materials we choose not to use. So for example, how do we manufacture? Do we manufacture just in time? Do we manufacture in large quantities? Are they manufactured overseas and then shipped to the US so that we end up with obsolete product at the end that has to be disposed of? So I think that, you know, frequently when we're looking at how to be a sustainable manufacturer, we're looking at not only what do we use, but what are the things that we're trying not to use? And how do we eliminate that additional waste or potential end of life issues? So I think that, you know, we really need to make sure we're looking at all sides of this if we really want to make an impact.
I have another question from Jess Kaler from Modalite. I'm interested from the manufacturer's perspective, what demand has been seen in the market and how they have marketed this to specifiers. How can we make a case to produce sustainability when the demand is not clear in many scenarios?
I'll make a first comment and others can follow. I think as far as the market needs go, we're beginning to see more projects asking for these sorts of standards. But I don't think it's up to the developers to lead the way. I think it's up to us as, you know, to take, you know, the leadership role in the design community to lead that conversation ourselves. So I think we need to take responsibility as designers, as manufacturers, to be the educators of the clients, to be the message of this voice to developers and say, these are what options are available, like let's go and ask for them together.
I'll add small comments to that. I think because I mean, we touched it in the presentation too. We had a way of hiding it behind the energy efficient LED for a while. So we didn't have to really face this one as a demand yet. But I think it is really becoming that time that it's ripe and then we need to really hit the street.
I have another question from Ben Rapkin from Lightglass. How are you thinking about value engineering and substitutions that are primarily price driven? Discounting the cost of the sustainability labels and certifications, the cost of making more sustainable products will likely be higher than the cost of non-sustainable products. it should be relatively easy to convince specifiers, manufacturers, reps to work with sustainable products. But what about contractors?
I think from my perspective, it's important when you're specifying and reviewing products that you consider this environmental performance as important as the other criteria. So you wouldn't, accept a substitution that was, didn't meet your aesthetic criteria, or, was the wrong color temperature. And if, you think it's important to have an HPD, then you have to stand by that the same way that you would stand by other criteria in your specifications. And I think we've talked a lot about education, and I think on this question, there's an element of talking to your client about this, and client education, and understanding where you can where you can save money without compromising your project goals, and to be honest, starting the beginning of the project by talking about those goals, and then really carrying through and realizing that you might be saving money, but perhaps you're compromising commitments that you've made in other areas.
Yeah.
Josh, I'd like to take a stab at that, which is, I think that this perception that sustainability has to cost more is something that we're fighting every day.
Yes.
And someone mentioned the triple bottom line of sustainability, and for me, the goal is to have things that don't have to cost more. You look back to, I know, Scott, you were talking about examples from the past, right? You think about when McDonough, and Brongart were doing their studies with fabric and textiles, and realizing that if they eliminated toxins from the dyes, that their workers didn't have to wear masks anymore, and they weren't getting sick, and so the cost could actually go down, and their waste wasn't declared hazardous waste, and so they could biodegrade it, and it wasn't more expensive. And so the goal, I think, in all of this is actually to think about how to figure out how do you save money by doing this, and to really have that triple win of it being good for the people who are making these products, good for the bottom line, and then also good for the environment. So there's something about shifting that mentality that I think is really important. I will say, I think Tristan's been a little bit heavy on HPDs because he's here, but really what I've heard from a lot of manufacturers to take that first step, in that a lot of people don't know what's in the products, and that's it's like, okay, let's put it down. There's no judgment in HPD. It's just, this is what it is. And then the next step is to improve and see what's going to happen. But it's taking that next step, and that's the first step. And a lot of manufacturers are giving us the feedback on that the value of taking that first step without the judgment.
I think we also
I was going to say, I think the word has gotten out that, when this movement first started, roughly 10 years ago, manufacturers were afraid of publishing this information because they felt they would be judged for it. And I think the word has gotten out that there's toxic chemicals in everything. And it's a good step. It's a responsible step to share what's in your stuff. And there's a little known, the first step is really not publishing that first HPD or that first declare label. There's a hidden step that happens before that, where the manufacturer does do the research and find out what's in that product. And they put those CAS numbers in the HPD builder or in the Toxnaut or other tool, find out what the health hazards are. And some of those chemicals really look pretty bad. And the manufacturer might start to have a conversation with the supplier and say, boy, is there anything else you can sell me that'll perform the same function that might not kill my customers? And those conversations with suppliers often result in innovations and avoided chemicals before that HPD declare label ever gets published. So that's just something I like to emphasize for US designers, to understand the benefit of asking for that HPD or declare label, because before you even get it, before you even read it, if you never even do read it, because I know it's confusing and filled with jargon, benefits are accruing up the supply chain.
I'd like to address the issue about pricing. Even though we've been a sustainable company from the very beginning, we still had to compete against other companies that were not. So we're big believers in market-based pricing. The market's going to tell us what the value of our products is worth to them and whether or not they're willing to pay for it. So I think that we all have to look at pricing from a market-based pricing perspective. But I think, you know, as I look at the people on this panel, we represent manufacturers that operate in the mid plus pricing tiers of the market. I think the real challenge is going to be how do we bring along manufacturers who are operating at the lower end of the scale, who are more white goods, where they compete primarily on price. And I think that's going to be a little more challenging. But, you know, this is a starting point.
I think that's really going to be where the power of the consumer comes in, and the specifier as well, is that, you know, like when we choose like what our criteria are for a product, that it will not be based on just price. That's where those companies will realize that in order to maintain their market share, they're going to have to make a few changes.
I have a question. I'm not sure who it's from. Is it preferred to specify the labels requiring HPD, declare, etc., or the rating system such as LEEDs fixture must meet the requirements to achieve the credit, which would allow 3-name specification to be easier to achieve?
Yeah, I think the question is about sort of how you put that in the specifications, and I would recommend being general and allowing different products that might have different labels or certifications, as long as they're compliant with the credit to qualify. That will broaden your reach.
I think what's interesting about that is, you know, if we go back to the word that Raiko used earlier, trust. Whether you believe there's a premium or not on that label, what you're paying for is trust, right? And so if you're aligning with partners who are disciplined in running their businesses or designing their projects, or anybody in the value chain that have this information and demonstrate responsibility and can make that available to you in a transparent way, is it worth the premium if you can have that information for free? And so I think, you know, as we pursue these things, the underlying philosophical belief that we can and should be better is important. And some of these things that we talk about that may or may not come with a premium, like a label, is really that bridge between what we think somebody does and what we're asking them to do, right?
I think that was the last question.
Great. Well, thank you so much for everyone for tuning in, and have a lovely evening.
Thank you. And on behalf of the Boston and Rhode Island section, I'd really like to thank all of the panelists and for their work and their contribution to this conversation, and all of the attendees for the fantastic questions. I think this is a really engaging discussion, and I appreciate everyone tuning in today and participating.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Have a good evening.